to Field Notes, the monthly podcast of modern steel construction, the monthly magazine of AISC. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger, Chief Editor of Modern Steel Construction. This month's guest is Mark Waggoner, a senior principal with Walter P. Moore. He is a leader in the field of long-span roof design and has worked on several professional sports facilities for the roofs, including SoFi Stadium, the home of the Los Angeles Rams and LA Chargers, and also one of this year's AISC Ideas 2 award winners. And of course, if you happened to catch the Super Bowl last year, the 2022 Super Bowl, you got to see the building in all its glory. And we'll talk about that project in a little bit. Mark, thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I understand you're based in Austin, but where are you from originally? Are you from there?
I am from Austin originally. I'm one of the few people here who were originally from here, but yeah.
I was going to say, Austin has seen quite a population boom over the last several years. I want to talk about Austin in a little bit, but first, maybe I want to talk a little bit about your career and your role with Walter P. Moore and how you got to where you are. So, how did you get into the world of buildings?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose everyone's got a story about that. I went into school kind of wanting to get into structural design. I had done a few in high school. I'd done a few church mission trip projects where we went and built some stuff, and I enjoyed doing that and kind of figuring out how to pull everything together to get something built, and that seemed like a natural fit to me, and along with an interest in science and math kind of topics, so it came together for me.
Very good. Talking on that same vein, when you were younger, were there certain buildings or structures, or even maybe as you started to get older and notice things a little bit more, certain buildings out there that made you go, wow, this is what I want to do, that influenced you to get into the field?
Yeah, I would say that maybe that came a little bit later when I was in college. I think you take a lot of classes where you learn how to design a beam and those kind of things, but they don't do a lot of teaching of, hey, here's how you come up with something like the Hancock building or something like that, right?
Right.
I got a copy. I found my way into David Billington's The Tower and the Bridge, read that book, and kind of got into that sort of thing. Devoured a lot of those kinds of books. Billington stuff. There was a book that came out on George Schleich when I was in grad school that was pretty influential. Just kind of seeing what people are out there doing and how innovative and creative it could be. What the kind of stuff that's possible, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, you learn the theoretical stuff in class, but then of course you see the real life examples. Yeah. Very good. Well,
at the end of that, I'll just add too, maybe the culmination of that for me when I finished up grad school, as I was finishing up grad school, somebody came to UT from SOM and sort of pitched this thing they were doing. They do a structural engineering traveling fellowship every year where they give you some money to go travel and see some of these kinds of structures and those kind of things. So I was fortunate enough to get to do that the summer after I finished grad school and before I started work at Walter P. Moore. Traveled around Europe and got to see a lot of those buildings that I had read about in those books, and that was quite an experience.
Sure. Oh, I can imagine. Obviously there's countless good examples of great architecture and structural engineering in Europe. Was there one city in particular that just wowed you more than any other?
Well, this is I'll leave the concrete examples out because this is a steel podcast, so we'll ignore those. But and at least maybe relevant to what I do today in Munich, the Munich Olympic Stadium for the 72 Olympics. Here, one of the first kind of cable structures ever built, pioneered a whole lot of things. In that vein, very influential buildings. But that's certainly one thing that stood out.
Sure. Yeah, and that's definitely more of a modern example as opposed to some of the other examples that have been around for hundreds and thousands of years.
Sure.
That's cool. So I heard you say UT. So you grew up in Austin, live in Austin. So you also went to school at the University of Texas?
Yeah, I went away for undergrad. I did my undergrad at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I came back to UT for grad school.
Yeah, very good to hear. Yeah, no, there's some cool buildings in St. Louis as well, of course, and the one that everybody knows too.
Yeah, little arch there.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's neat to hear about some of the influences, that you got before you started working. But so after you started working, early in your career, can you were there any projects out there that you could point to that served as a really good early lesson, or maybe that even changed some of your preconceived notions about designing buildings?
I guess maybe in some of the things I worked on, when I first started at Walter P. Moore, I worked on what was then Reliance Stadium, now NRG Stadium, which was replacing the Astrodome, the eighth wonder of the world and all that kind of stuff. So that was pretty interesting. I kind of came in not at the very beginning of that one. The design had been going on for a little while. But my second project after that was what's now State Farm Stadium for the Arizona Cardinals, and I worked on that kind of all the way through. And I think that one was pretty, I would say, pretty formative for me. Kind of seeing the whole process, but also kind of realizing that we do a lot more than just design stuff. We're a part of getting something very complicated built, right? So working with the builders and how that interaction goes was kind of maybe set the stage for a lot of other things that I've done since.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Astro, or not the Astrodome itself. I was going to get to that in a sec, but the replacement stadium. I mean, that's a good kind of introduction to big projects earlier in your career, for sure.
Yeah.
I grew up in Texas, so I will say the first Major League Baseball game I ever saw was at the Houston Astros, and it was at the Astrodome. So, yes, from what I understand, it's still standing. Is that right? Or they haven't taken it down, have they?
No, they haven't taken it down. It's still there. I think there's been a kind of long-ranging debate in Houston over what to do with it. I think the city is pretty determined to do something with it. It's got some things that have to happen to it to make it usable, but it is sort of a civic heritage building. I think it's going to stay, and some use of it will happen eventually, right?
Right. That's good to hear. And yeah, I mean, any Houstonians I've talked to, I mean, they speak of it very fondly. And yeah, it's part of the landscape there. It's got to stay in some form or fashion.
Being a podcast, if you want to play some music, there's a singer-songwriter here in Austin named Bruce Robinson. He's got a song about the Astrodome. You should look that up.
I don't know that one. I will definitely look that one up. That's great to hear. Very cool. And you also mentioned State Farm. So, I mean, that was also, that was on TV on the Super Bowl pretty recently as well. I mean, that was just last month. I mean, we're talking, or actually a couple months ago, since we're talking in March. I gotta say, when I saw her, my first thought was, "Oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't fall." That was quite an ambitious halftime show, and we're big into promoting construction safety here, and I couldn't really tell. I'm like, is she tied off? Does she have a parachute? What's going on here? What safety precautions are in place? But it sounds like at the very least, the roof was able to handle all the loads of those floating platforms.
Yeah, I can say that. I can guarantee that part. But I believe she had a very discreet tether tied to those behind her on the platforms. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the magic of halftime shows. You couldn't even see the wires. So I mean, speaking of which, so how did you get into that? I mean, as far as doing long span roof design, especially for some of these massive stadium projects.
Well, I don't know if luck is a good answer or not, but coming to work at Walter P. Moore, I knew they did a lot of stadiums, and I had an interest in that, and then also an interest in long span structures. I think the things I had seen on the SOM fellowship and those interests tend to be more roof structures, shell structures, cathedrals, things like that. And anyway, I was fortunate enough to kind of start working on the first retractable roof stadium for the NFL, and you do one, then you kind of roll into the next one, and it just kind of keeps going, right? So.
Right, you become the go-to person.
Yeah, I think the saying when we compete for a job, you you get one chance to screw it up. Or we haven't screwed them up yet, so we keep doing them. So
There you go.
Screw it up, you don't get to do it again.
Right. So that's good motivation. So on those types of projects, I mean, you've worked on a lot of those over the years, and one of the things that, and I can't remember what the roof, like the cladding is at State Farm, but I know at SoFi, for example, and I think in Minneapolis too, where the Vikings play, ETFE has become, I don't know if I'd say it's a go-to system, but it just seems like you're starting to hear a lot more about ETFE when it comes to roofs for projects like this. I'm just curious, what's your take on it, or what's your experience with it? I mean, is it like, as far as designing structures to accommodate ETFE?
Yeah, we've done several ETFE projects, including SoFi. Before that, obviously we've designed quite a few retractable roof stadiums with these big giant moving panels, especially for NFL stadiums. And what we've found is that when we do that, the idea is obviously they can open up the roof and have a view of the sky and sort of feel like you're outdoors, but the teams and the fan base, for whatever reason, on those buildings have tended to keep the roof closed a lot and not really open it nearly as much as we all talked about when we were designing the building.
Right.
And so that's been part of a shift to, hey, maybe there's a simpler way to be connected to the outside. And the Vikings, we had some early involvement in that project before the final design, but the Vikings was one of those jobs where they said, we're not, it's given the climate here and all these things, we're not going to open, if we had a retractable roof, we're not going to open it very much. And there was architect Brian Truby, who was at HKS at the time, he had the saying was, clear as the new retractable, right? So you can see the sky, but you don't have to have all the moving parts and maintenance headache and those kinds of things of a operable roof. So that's been kind of the go-to system on the last several stadiums, including SoFi. And it's pretty, I do a lot of tensile structure design. I chair the ASCE 55 committee on, that's the tensile membrane standard. And so I'm pretty familiar with that part of the industry, and designing the steel for that is kind of like, it's a little bit different than designing for a piece of like PTFE fiberglass fabric, but it's kind of the same ballpark. And there's a lot of little ins and outs of putting together the steel system for that, but it's something we've done on quite a few projects now.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, like I said, you're starting to hear see more examples of it. And it sounds like from what you're saying, we're going to start seeing even more. That's a good point on the retractable roofs. I mean, it seems great in practice or in theory, but then, I feel like there's so many times when I've seen a game on TV and it's closed, and I'm like, it's in this, somewhere in the South, it seems pretty warm and it's not raining. Why do they have it closed? And of course, in that case, well, it's too hot out. So I feel like, people tend to err on the side of, or the teams seem to err on the side of keeping them closed. So, but with SoFi, I mean, obviously you've done, and I want to talk about SoFi a little bit, especially again, not me just because it was an award winner, but just because it's such a neat project. You've done a lot of big projects. You've even done others with ETFE. But I mean, when you look at SoFi, I mean, it's just very striking. I mean, it really puts a new twist on stadium design. I'm just curious, what was your first impression when you saw the architectural vision?
Well, we were and on a job like that, you kind of have to be, but we were fortunate enough to be involved from kind of the very early stages of what that thing was, including at a time when there were some other options on the table. There's sort of something like what it ended up being, and then a couple of other options that we were helping them look at and kind of decide what the best path forward was. So it's something that I've had my eyes on or been a part of for such a long period that it's kind of hard to distinguish like a first reaction, right? It just sort of evolves over time as you work on the design. But it's obviously the basic parameters, given where that the Hollywood Park site is right by LAX, which meant that we had to have a height limit and had to push the building into the ground, and the high seismicity in LA, and just the desire for this very open, transparent roof, lightweight roof. That's all kind of been there from the beginning. So it was a really interesting, juicy challenge to be involved with from the start.
Sure. Well, and I mean, just for, again, it's an innovative design, just from the look of it. But are there any innovations at the stadium that aren't as obvious, that that haven't been talked about as much?
Oh, there's probably 100 little things in the stadium that are interesting, in of themselves to talk about. But it'd be hard to single out one. I would say not really a steel topic here, but we spent a whole lot of time figuring out how to bury this building 100 feet in the ground, right? Probably more than any other part of the design. But there are hundreds of little, crazy things that we had to solve in the building as we go through. But that's all kind of organized by making some maybe 4 or 5 really big picture decisions at the outset when you start that lead to everything else. So.
Sure. And, speaking of having to dig that into the ground, because I know, I knew about the requirement as far as being close to LAX and everything. Remind me, what was there before? I mean, where Hollywood Park is, I know that's a massive new development that's all kind of coming together. But what was it, open land, or were there a lot of buildings that were raised there?
Oh, so it was a horse racing track. So there was a horse racing track that had been there for a long time. It wasn't in operation anymore. Right. There was an operational casino on the site, which was an important part of the site, and that was moved to one end of the site to kind of make room for the rest of the development. But not a lot of buildings, probably one of the most open sites, biggest open expanses of land in LA that you could possibly find. Right.
Sure. I mean, when you say that, it makes me, it kind of rings a bell. It's even like in recent years. Well, first of all, is the Forum is still there? Is that correct or not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the Forum is just to the north of the SoFi site, and still hosts concerts and those kind of things. And just to the south of the site, they're under construction right now, is the Intuit Dome, which will be the new building for the Clippers.
Gotcha. Right, and then the Lakers will still stay downtown.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Yeah. And then the Forum, that's another one, sort of like the Astrodome. I mean, that's like kind of, that place is an institution. I mean, it'd be really difficult to ever have to remove the Forum. But what I have noticed when I've flown into LAX before, I couldn't remember exactly what was there, but all I know is it seemed like there was a wide open expanse, and then the Forum like stuck out like a sore thumb because it was the biggest thing there. And plus, I'd seen it on TV so many times from the, inside and outside, that it was very prominent as the plane was approaching LAX. Well, that's cool. So, I mean, looking to future projects, I don't know how much you can talk about them in terms of, building more stadiums, long span roof or not. I mean, do you have any, did that project give you any ideas for future projects, something that's kind of that might say push the envelope?
Yeah, no, it's maybe, there's things we do that work well, and maybe we look at them again, but each project, that SoFi had its things, burying it in the ground, and a lot of seismic things, the things when we go do another project, in another site and another climate. For example, we're working on the Buffalo Bills new stadium right now. It's got it's a whole different set of considerations, snow loads, things like that. And so you're kind of, each project kind of follows its own path, right? Sure.
Yeah. Like all polar opposite there. I mean, I feel like we've been hearing like this winter, especially a lot of snow in Buffalo. So, yeah, I'm sure those snow loads are nothing to joke around with.
Right. Yeah, pretty heavy there.
Right. Well, so now, I mean, I was just curious, since you're from Austin, I just wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about that. I mean, Austin's one of those cities that everybody can agree on, like I've never heard somebody that said they didn't like Austin. I have heard people, and maybe you can speak to this, like people that grew up there, and they will maybe see, for better or for worse, just acknowledge that it has changed a lot, especially in the last 20 years or so. But I'm curious, like, as a native, what do you enjoy the most about it? What keeps you there?
Yeah, it's sort of a running joke here to say, Austin's gone downhill ever since I moved here in, insert date, right? So, and interesting timing to ask that question too. We're this is the peak, the Thursday of the South by Southwest conference in Austin, when there's like 100,000 extra people in town. The weather has been perfect. Everyone comes here and have a great time. The weather's nice. It's like the 1 week a year when the weather's perfect, and then like some not small percentage of those people decide they want to move here. So and as an answer to your question, Austin is terrible. Please don't move here.
Yep. No, that sounds about right. Yeah. No, I used to have some friends who live there. I live in Chicago now, and they actually live here too. But yeah, the first time I ever spent any real time there, I was there a few times when I was younger, but just like for a few hours or a day. But yeah, I can see why people move there for sure. And it always had kind of a very progressive, kind of laid back, almost hippie vibe for a long time. And I know you can still kind of find that there, but I know it's a little harder to find than it used to be.
Yeah, those things are still here if you know where to look.
Right. Do you have? Well, I don't know. Now, after you give your answer on like your thoughts on people moving there, I was gonna say, I asked you if you had a favorite barbecue or even taco joint, but I'm not sure you'd share it.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna give away any of those secrets. But yeah, no, there's plenty of. We have both food groups here, barbecue and Tex-Mex, and there are plenty of good places.